Welcome everyone to today's Lunch and Learn webinar from DNA Business Management Solutions. Today's topic is the benefits of cloud server hosting, your Sage 300 solution on Sage Partner Cloud, and other options with DNA and our friends at Strategic Online Services, or SOS. So I'm Will Booth from DNA Business Management Solutions. And we're very lucky to have Phil Hicks from Strategic Online Services with us. So I'm going to just hand it right over to you, Phil, just while I tell everybody that we are recording today's event. So we've put everybody on mute, and we will share the recording after. And so if you have any questions, there's a question chat. There's a chat if you want to chat with me, and there's a questions area. You can put that in your in the chat, and I'll either answer the questions, I'll ask Phil the questions during the presentation, or we'll hold them for the end. All right, so I see your screen, Phil. Looks good. So Phil's been in the Sage 300 and formerly called ACPAC world since 2002, I think, Phil, and you've been working with Strategic Online Services since 2014, you said? And so Phil's got a broad scope of knowledge working in the Sage world, and since he joined SOS, they've been one of our key providers in helping our clients host their Sage 300 environment when they don't want to have it on servers on their own infrastructure. And Phil's going to talk about some new options through Sage that SOS is going to be providing. He's going to show a demonstration. So I hand it over to you, Phil. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks very much for that introduction there, Will, and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for jumping online. So the agenda for today, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey and background on hosting for Sage 300. Then we're going to have a look at what some of the options are if you wanted to have your Sage 300 software hosted, specifically looking at both the Strategic Online Services offering and the Azure offering through Sage directly. And we're going to look at some high-level comparison information for you to take away, and then also I've got a more detailed comparison between the two offerings. And then we're going to go through a short brief demo on both the SOS server hosting and the Azure hosting for Sage 300, and then discuss some pricing. There will be ample amount of time to go through questions and answers at the end of today's session, and look forward to walking you through each of these areas. So let's get started. So for those of you that are not familiar with hosting, so what is it? Well, your Sage 300 that's more than likely installed on-premise in a server, probably in the broom closet somewhere. It's moved from that location to another location, and typically off-site, away from your office, and it would be managed by another company like Strategic Online Services. They manage all the uptime, the backups, the installation, the service packs, the support, that type of stuff, to make sure that your Sage 300 is accessible and online. And the way that you would access your Sage 300 is either through like a web browser or a remote desktop connection. So a little bit of background on Strategic Online Services. We have been providing hosting for Sage 300. I keep calling it ACPAC because I've been around for such a long time, since 1999, and we're based here out of Canada. Specializing in hosting for Sage 300, payroll, and all of the Sage third-party applications that you're probably very familiar with using, that have enhanced the functionality of the Sage platform significantly over the last 10, 20, 30 years, plus all of the other Microsoft Office and business applications that you would need to run as well that go in conjunction with your Sage 300. So for the customers that we work with, the value really comes from making sure that we can help to reduce your Sage 300 support costs. And what do I mean by that? So if you buy 20 new workstations, you're not having to pay a consultant to come out and do workstation setups. You're not having to worry about an IT firm that's come out and done an installation on the server and has impacted your Sage 300 accounting software in an adverse way, and suddenly you can't access it on a Monday morning to do all your normal processing and data entry. So it really simplifies that because we put it into a pristine environment where no one else is accidentally going to go on there and make any changes or stop it from working. And with that, it means that we're able to help reduce your server hardware costs. So quite often when you buy a server and you put it on premise, most of the clients that we've worked with in the past, even if they had a 3, 5, 10, 20 user setup for Sage 300, they typically over purchase on their hardware, too much RAM, CPU, processing power, just in case they grow or their requirements change. And of course, when you're doing that overspending, you're paying for capacity that you really don't need. And it's a fixed cost, or what I refer to it as a sunk cost, when you're paying for on-premise hardware. Service support costs also disappear, so you're not having to then pay for a separate IT provider to come out and do all that separate maintenance and hardware support on your servers that are in your office. And especially in a world that we're in right now, we're not having to pay people to come on site into office locations spread around the country. All of that is managed through that hosted environment. And with that, it really extends the life of your existing desktop hardware. Because accessing Sage 300 is done through a web browser or a remote desktop connection, you don't need high-powered local desktops to have a lot of processing power to run the application and connect in. So we can really extend the life of the hardware, where you really just need a good screen and a keyboard and effectively nothing else to go with it. So there's two options that we offer for hosting through Strategic Online Services. The first option is directly through Strategic Online Services, where we actually own all of the hardware. We manage all the disaster recovery, and all of the servers are located in our offices here in Canada. And with that, the pricing is based on a per user concurrent basis for access. And the thing that our clients really like about that is that it's a fixed cost per month. So you know exactly how much you're paying on a monthly basis for the number of users that you need to have access into that server. So that's our traditional offering. We've been doing that for the better part of 21, 22 years now. And we have thousands of clients that are currently running under that setup. The other offering that we've recently partnered with Sage is to be able to provide their Azure hosting for Sage 300 as well. And at a high level, these are the key differences that we see between them. The hardware is owned and managed by Microsoft. So physically, our team that provides all the support and maintenance, they don't physically see the hardware in our office locations. They are typically, from what I understand, based out of Quebec in Canada. So that aspect, to make sure that the power is switched on, the backups are done, the redundancies there, that's left up to Microsoft to make sure that component is done from there. The Sage 300 software and the actual server, the configuration and how Sage 300 is set up and run is all managed directly by Strategic Online Services in that scenario. The big difference that we see is really, it comes down to it from a pricing perspective, and that is that the Azure pricing is based on a flat fee per month with a variable component based on the usage that you have on that server. So the one difficult part from an end customer perspective is, how do you know exactly how much it's going to cost to use the Sage Azure hosting platform? And the simple answer is you don't. There's a minimum cost per month, and based on how much you're using that with processing power and people connected onto the server, and it's what Azure call compute units. So based on how much you're consuming of that on a monthly basis, you'll get an invoice at the end of the month based on the total usage that you've had throughout the month. So if we go into the more detailed comparison, because there's a lot of things that you need to understand between the two different hosting options here, and I'm just going to zoom in on my screen so it's a little bit easier for everyone to read there. So I'm just going to refer to the Strategic Online Services offering and then the Sage Partner Cloud offering, and compare each of the ones. And these are a series of a number of frequently asked questions or areas that people are interested in to understand how both hosting platforms compare one against the other. So from a software perspective, your Sage 300, it will work in both environments, both SOS's hosting and the Sage Partner Cloud. Sage CRM, if you're using that, it definitely works under the Sage this SOS environment. It is possible to run in the Sage Partner Cloud environment, but it hasn't yet been deployed or confirmed in that area. All other Sage software is supported under SOS, but because the Sage Partner Cloud is still relatively new, they haven't tested a lot of the other Sage applications yet in that environment. In theory, though, it is just another Windows environment, so absolutely it should work. It's just when you're setting up the Sage Partner Cloud environment, there's a few more technical things from a setup perspective that you have to be able to jump through that we're familiar with. Can you use any of your other Windows software on the server? Absolutely, you can. That works for both SOS and the Sage Partner Cloud. Is all of the Sage third-party software supported? Absolutely. On the SOS platform, it is. It's partially supported on the Sage Partner Cloud, so you'd have to be just careful just to double check each of the products before you make the move across to that. Will we guarantee that to make all third-party software work? Absolutely on the SOS platform. On the Sage Partner Cloud at this point, until they've actually tested and confirmed all those other applications, there's no guarantees at this stage, but it should, in theory, work and be able to be migrated across. Can you use your existing current Sage licensing? This is a really big one that you have to be aware of before you move into a cloud environment. With SOS, absolutely, your existing Sage licensing works fine, no change at all. If you go on the Sage Partner Cloud, special new licensing is required. So you will have to buy the new licenses to make sure that you'll be able to use that software on the Sage Partner Cloud. I would strongly encourage you to speak to Will at DNA to make sure that you don't lose any credit from any other payments you've made on your existing software to get that transition all lined up between the two.
Yeah, Mike and I can have that discussion when it gets to be the time, and we'll work with our clients in Sage. It's the same software, it's just a different license code because of the whole Azure Partner Cloud, Sage Online enterprise operating system licensing. So it's really a back end to Microsoft, right, Phil? So they just needed to change the subscription to be able to manage it.
Correct.
But you're not really getting, it's no different software. It's just a different front end and where the back end is. So that's why they have to end your current subscription and give you a new one.
Yep.
So we can take care of that with them. Thanks, Phil.
Very good. Can you stay on your current version of Sage 300 if you're moving to hosting? So let's say you're on version 2016, 2017, or even earlier. We've still got clients that are running on 5.1, 5.2 from way on a time. So moving that across onto SOS, that's fine. If you want to go onto the Sage Partner Cloud, you must be on the latest 2 versions of Sage 300 for that to take place. So what you would need to do is make sure that you get your upgrade done through DNA first before you would move on to the Sage Partner Cloud. For a lot of customers, though, they like the ease of just being able to move to the cloud and then scheduling 3, 6, 12 months later with DNA to do the upgrade when it's convenient for them, rather than having to go through the upgrade straight away. If you have
that typically depends on the complexity of their environment, right, Phil? I mean, if we've got a bunch of customizations and they just want to get somewhere safe and secure, that's what we've done with you guys in the past, right? Put it on your infrastructure and worry about the upgrade later, or maybe it does make sense to do the upgrade as we bring it there. We're flexible, and we'll go through all those discussions with the clients and you guys.
If you've previously purchased Microsoft SQL licensing from Sage, that can't be used on either the SOS or the Sage Partner Cloud platform. So all the pricing that are provided for both of those platforms includes the latest in the Sage Microsoft SQL licensing. So just make sure that when you're working with Will and the team there, that Sage do drop off that line item on your annual recurring fee.
Yeah, and they've made it easier to just, there's a form we can send and the client just says, I don't need that anymore. And they take off your renewal fees.
Perfect.
It basically ends up being a wash, right, Phil?
Yep.
For the most part, what Sage charges is similar to what SOS charges or through Microsoft.
Yep. So on the infrastructure and services side, just a bit of a detailed breakdown. The hardware and or data center, that's all owned and managed by SOS. Whereas if you're on the Sage Partner Cloud, that's outsourced to Microsoft. The technical support, though, is provided by SOS, regardless of whether it's on our hosted environment or the Sage Partner Cloud. Backups, security, Windows updates, user management, password resets, antivirus, spam filters, that's all managed by our team here at SOS for both of those hosting options. Likewise, if you need help to do so regardless of whether it's on SOS's platform or Sage Partner Cloud, our team here in our office, they're super experienced with Sage over the last 10, 20 years. So you'll get the same level of Sage support for your installation and the technical aspects of the setup, regardless of which platform that you're on. Can you install Sage if needed? Yeah, absolutely, you can through your Sage partner in DNA on the SOS platform. On the Sage Partner Cloud, no, that would have to be done by SOS to get that configured and running on that platform there. If you want help with upgrades, you'd need to do that through the Sage Partner Cloud, through DNA, and DNA can facilitate those upgrades on the SOS platform. On the Sage Partner Cloud, no, you would have to do that directly through SOS to be able to get that done. Can you get a test server for free, especially when you're looking at doing upgrades from one version to the next? Yes, you can do both. There's no cost with SOS, but there is an additional cost to activate a new server on the Azure platform to be able to do that. Can we do the upgrades for you if required? Absolutely, you can do that through DNA, and they can manage that same process on the SOS platform. On the Sage Partner Cloud, no, that would have to be directed back through SOS on that. DNA, of course, will be able to have full access to both platforms to be able to provide their normal Sage support. So if you're ringing them up for help with bank recs or needing additional training or report writing and those types of things, both of those supports can be provided on both of those platforms there. If you do need a demo or test server, similar to doing a test upgrade, yes, you can have that for free on SOS, but you do have to pay an additional cost on the Sage Partner Cloud to be able to do that. Are you forced to upgrade every 12 months? On the SOS platform, you're not. So if you move across and you're happy to stay on version, say 2020 or 2019, you can stay on that for as long as the current server will support it. But if you are on the Sage Partner Cloud, be aware you do need to make sure those upgrades are taking place on a regular basis each year to stay on the latest 2 versions and not fall behind on that. Both platforms will support 2-factor authentication on those on the hosting there. So from a pricing perspective, where does it sort of lie on a pricing area? So on average, you'll be paying $100 to $120 Canadian per user per month on the SOS platform. It's hard to know exactly what the price is on the Sage Partner Cloud. We are working with them to really try and nail that down. They will give you a flat fee per month for access to the server, and then you'll get charged a variable amount per month to be running on the Sage Partner Cloud. We would love to be able to say to end customers, it costs X amount per month, but that's just not the model that Azure has taken. They charge on the number of compute units used or consumed on a monthly basis. Hence, you will get a variable invoice at the end of every single month that you're working from there. You can pay for all services on a month-to-month basis. That's fine. I just spoke there about the variable cost components versus the simple cost method that we have both on the SOS platform, and of course it'll work in the US, Canada, or worldwide, both platforms, absolutely. So I just wanted to run through and give you a bit of insight as to some of the more detailed analysis between either the SOS hosting platform that we have or what we could potentially set up on the Sage Partner Cloud using Azure between the two there. So just to give you an idea, this is going to look pretty similar for both as to an SOS demo versus using the Azure platform. Through SOS, you'd be accessing it through a normal remote desktop link. When you open up that remote desktop link, you'll have access to all your normal Sage applications and files and folders, and you've got a full remote desktop experience where you can save all your files and documents to be running through there. The Sage Azure environment is similar yet different. So when you first log in, you're logging into a web page. and you can choose to log into Sage 300, or you could go into the virtual machine, both of which are accessible through a web browser. So if I open up Sage 300, I've actually just got the Sage 300 application directly available through the web browser. No desktop that's actually visible to be able to save local files or access. If I wanted that local desktop experience, I would choose the virtual machine instead and go that path. So biggest difference is on the Sage Partner Cloud through Azure, they're deploying it through a web browser as opposed to deploying it through a traditional remote desktop experience, which is what SOS is deploying it for or through for clients to be able to access. Both rely upon you having internet connectivity wherever you are to be able to access either platform to be able to run with moving forward.
Yeah, and I think, Phil, we tend to recommend that if you're working from a home office or 50 megabit per second's probably a good speed to be at least, right? So you don't have lag time communicating back and forth. Obviously in an office, if you've got a bunch of people connecting, you want to make sure you've got good internet, right?
Yep. Absolutely. So, and just touching on the internet connection there, just as a point of interest where some people may or may not be aware of, if you go to Rogers or Telus or one of the other major internet providers or retail internet providers in Canada, quite often you'll see, you'll get, they advertise speeds of 100 to 300 megabits per second. But the way that you're actually buying that, that's a contract that says up to that speed. A lot of business to business internet plans, they actually have a guaranteed minimum set of 5, 10, 20 megabytes, 50 megabytes per second connection. And that's what we say, if you've got 5 or 10 people connecting in from the one office location, just double check to make sure that you are on one of those internet subscriptions where you are getting a guaranteed minimum speed. Otherwise, it can be a bit misleading when people say, well, hang on, why am I only getting 2 or 3 megs and it's slowed right down? And that's because you're on a contract that is up to a certain limit, no guarantee of a base minimum speed. So we just encourage people when they're going through that just to double check what contract they actually have with Telus or Rogers or whoever else may be providing your internet at the time.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing from a technical side that we have to worry about, right? Is just the network speed and connectivity to the internet. We don't have to worry about hardware and versions of Windows and all that stuff anymore. One of the big benefits of doing this, whatever platform you choose.
Yep. So from here, yeah, it really is quite basic from accessing both of those environments between the two there. Pricing, in a more detailed breakdown. So with strategic online services, we're looking at a base fee of $100 per user per month for concurrent access. That's really neat. So if you've got people job sharing, you just pay for the number of people that are going to be connected at once. The Microsoft SQL is added to that, and if you need Excel licensing as well, that's bundled in. Every server comes with 100 gigabytes of storage, and if you're just using Sage 300, unless you've got a 100 gigabyte database, that storage is more well and truly enough to cater for that setup. We have a one-time fee of $1,500 for the setup, and if you go onto a 3-year contract, you do get a 15% discount on the pricing there for the hosting for Sage 300. On the Azure side of things, our approach is a little bit different. Because of the variable pricing, we need to set up a time to review your system requirements. We'll be able to then provide you with a base monthly price, and then every month you'll be given an invoice after the usage calculations have come through to work out how much you've actually consumed from that needs to be billed and paid for on a monthly basis. Azure do provide some calculators that you can use to try and predict how much Microsoft will be billing you for that. Having said that, it's still indicative. And what we're trying to do at SOS to make it a little bit easier for those people that do want to use the Microsoft Azure platform is we've got a number of clients right now that we're running on that, where we're trying to compare their usage and the monthly billing so that we can actually give you some far more accurate data, so that if you do want to go ahead with the Microsoft Azure platform, you can do it with some level of confidence to know roughly what your monthly bill is going to be. And that's probably the area where we get stuck on the most. From an end user perspective, using Sage 300, your experience will pretty much be the same through SOS or on the Azure platform. It really just comes down to that cost perspective as to one's a fixed cost and one's a variable cost. And I'm assuming that if most people are dialed in and they're accountants on the line or in accounting, it's nice to be able to have known fixed costs that you can budget for and forecast, as opposed to a variable cost that you're going to have to try and factor in and work through there on a monthly basis.
Yeah, and I think as we get more familiar with it, Phil, your team's going to have a much better knowledge of what those variable costs are going to be based on a client's after you've gone through the review, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to keep learning.
Yeah, from early indications that there are some particular scenarios where the Azure platform may be far more cost effective to run than the SOS platform. An example might be you're a small not-for-profit, you have 2 users and you log in for a total of 2 hours per day. And as long as you're logging off and turning the server off, you're not getting charged for the compute units for the server to be on all the time. So there are certain scenarios where it will make sense. And as we're onboarding several clients into the Azure environment, we'll be able to come back and then guide clients through that so that they can make an informed decision as to where the cutover is and where it makes the most sense between the 2 systems on that. Having said that, if you go on the Azure platform and you're getting charged way too much and it's not meeting your expectations, it's really straightforward. We can migrate you off of the Azure platform and put you back onto the SOS system and vice versa. So it's a relatively straightforward process to move you from one platform to the other. If you happen to be one of those clients that went onto Azure and you felt like you're getting charged too much, we can migrate you back onto the SOS platform and get you back onto that fixed cost. And
yeah. So thanks, Phil. I think we do have some questions here, so it's generated some thought and discussion for sure. And I just wanted to add, why did Sage choose Azure as the hosting platform? Why didn't they choose AWS and things like that? Well, Sage has always been a Windows, Microsoft-based platform in general, with this Microsoft SQL backend database, and the user interface is is a Windows-based environment, and even their web-based screens now on the web user interface are basically using web technology, but the backend is still running on Windows. So they had the strong partnership. They were already hosting on Azure for clients when they used to do their own hosting, and they wrote that front end that Phil showed us that basically gives you a nice kind of web GUI interface to log into, and depending if you have the security rights or not, you can either just click and go into a browser interface and just run the Sage desktop through the browser, or if you need as Phil showed, the remote desktop backend, you can do that, but it's still going through a browser. And some people like that more than clicking on remote desktop and logging in from your Windows device. So it gives you a little more flexibility. And that's also the reason why Sage has to change your subscription license, because a subscription manager that Sage 300 uses has to understand that you're in the partner cloud on Azure. So as we talked about earlier, yeah, there's a little bit of different pricing. We have to, the pricing's the same. We just have to switch your subscription over, and we'll work with Sage to make sure there's relatively little, if not no, impact on your fees. It just takes a little bit of time from us to work with Sage and our clients to do that. So the first question, Phil, I think I can answer. Somebody asked, does the pricing that you showed include the Sage license fees? And of course, the answer is it does not. You still have to have your own Sage subscription. Yep. Or even in the SOS case, I guess we didn't really talk about that. If you're still on the old perpetual license, you never switched over to the Sage subscription fee with the the annual fee or a monthly fee, Phil can SOS on their own hardware can still support that. We don't need to put you on a Sage subscription to do that. So we, if you're on an old version, like Phil said, and you still have the old perpetual licensing, no problem with SOS. On Azure, yeah, we have to switch you over to a subscription and the one that works with Azure. So it's that's another difference. I don't know if we went through that, but you still have to own a license that you pay Sage for. It's SOS is providing us a platform to put those licenses and run them in, and basically providing you the access, whether it's on their own hardware or Azure. So that answers that one. The next question, where's the data stored? I think you touched on it briefly.
So both platforms, the data is stored in Canada.
Yeah. So all your own hardware is in Canada, and the Microsoft Azure database is, I think you said, in Quebec, right? Yeah. Next question was, how do you ensure our backups are safe and secure?
So on the SOS platform, we can absolutely do that. We have a full disaster recovery failover server set up, and we test that on a daily basis to make sure that that works. As far as and this is, I guess, one of the key differences in the fact that we see and we work with our own hardware every day. When you're on the Sage Partner Cloud, we physically don't see that hardware. So there is a level of risk around backups there, should something go wrong. Now, you would think it's Microsoft and they would get it right. And tongue in cheek, I'm sure no multi-billion-dollar company's ever had a major disaster and not actually got through it properly. But yeah, so that is something to keep in mind, in the fact that when you are on the SOS platform, everything that we do, we see and touch and feel. Whereas in the Sage Partner Cloud, we are that one step removed from the hardware piece. So it's hard to give that level of guarantee on the Sage Partner Cloud versus the SOS platform.
Yeah. But Microsoft is also copying the data. I guess as a follow-on to that, you can also take a copy of your data from time to time and keep it wherever you want to keep it too. It's a database dump, basically, which is a feature in Sage, right, Phil?
Yep, absolutely. And for the couple of minutes that it takes to do a full database dump and take a local copy file, you can do that both on the Sage, on the SOS Sage platform, or the Sage Partner Cloud platform as well.
Right.
That's good practice nonetheless.
Yeah. And somewhat similar, how do you ensure that you prevent or minimize ransomware attacks? So I guess they're probably talking about, people's environments being corrupted and they can't get their data.
Yeah,
and they can't recover from backup and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so we have multiple layers of security set up to prevent such things like ransomware attacks and other viruses or malware coming onto our servers. Look, my typical response to that is there's two ways to look at it. It's our job to make sure all these servers are up and running and accessible for all of our clients. If we didn't do a good job of it, we'd go out of business very quickly, and we've been around for a long time. So there's a lot of reassurance you get there from the fact that we have been doing it for a hell of a long time. We have all of the typical penetration testing and security done up that we monitor on a daily basis there. One of the things when it comes to the security aspect is, look, the system really is only as safe and secure as your weakest link in your office. So if you have someone that wants to write down their passwords and connection details and keep it on a sticky note on their computer or somewhere else, and someone else was to gain access, then there is always that level of risk or exposure. Now, a couple of typical scenarios, even if you're opening an email and you go to download a file and our system picks it up and it alerts the user multiple times like, hey, this is a virus, don't download it, don't click the executable. If that person, after multiple prompts, still chooses to do that, and you get a virus on the server, it's super easy for us because we're taking nightly backups. It's a simple right mouse click restore from the night before at midnight, and you're up and back and running. So even in the worst case scenario, it does get on the server there. It can be quickly and easily restored. And the thing for us is that we're doing enterprise backups of your entire server. And when it comes to backups, a lot of people misunderstand the difference between data backups and an entire server backup. And we're doing the entire server backup so that when we restore, we're restoring the full Windows environment, all the applications, and the data. Whereas other people that walk around with a USB stick and they say, well, I've got a backup, but that's a backup of your database. You would still need to then buy a new server, install the Windows licensing, install the Sage 300 licensing, then restore your Sage 300 data. Now, that could take hours or days to do that, as opposed to a matter of minutes through SOS. So when you're thinking about how critical it is for your uptime and system availability, that's a really good reason that many clients have actually moved to us that we've talked to for several years, where they said, look, we're going to move to you guys when our current server dies, and we're not going to buy another on-premise server. We're going to move and get it hosted in the cloud. But unfortunately, that was 3 years out, and then 2 years later, they got ransomware, and they thought they had backups, and turns out their backups were several months or years old, and they lost months and months of work that went down the drain, that they had to re-enter all of the data there. So my advice is, if you're thinking about it, do it sooner rather than later, because these ransomwares, to me, it's only a matter of when, not if, these days.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess that can lead to a couple of these other questions. We got some good questions going on, Phil. So one of them is, how long does it take to get out of my local Sage and onto the cloud hosted
Sure.
version?
So if you're going onto the SOS Sage hosting, we typically say comfortably within 10 business days, you can move from your current on-premise environment to the SOS hosting environment. Now, that allows time for contracts to be signed, set you up as a customer, making sure that we've got the activations for your Sage licensing, current versions. We've arranged a time to do a cutover. The actual cutover itself and downtime, depending on how we want to structure it, could be as little as several minutes to half an hour to an hour of downtime. And we typically will schedule that out of hours to have the least impact on your operating in the switchover. Now, if you need to move really fast, i.e. you've got ransomware and you need to be up and running, we will prioritize that for an overnight installation and setup to get you running the next day. If you want to move on to the Sage Partner Cloud, because we have to go through and get the Sage licensing and provision it through the portal, even the quickest turnaround time would probably be 4 to 5 business days, and we'd still say budget for at least 2 weeks to switch across.
Yeah, and again, that also depends. Are we going at the same version you're at now, or is us, the DNA team, going to do a version upgrade and then load the new version into the cloud platform? So that adds some time, but it certainly makes it easier, because we're taking off the current server, doing the test upgrade, loading the data onto the SOS or Azure platform, and then making sure everything works, and then doing it again at the go live date. So like you said, faster if you're just staying at version, and we'll work through that with our clients. A little slower if we're doing an upgrade, and depending on which platform. But that's why we're talking about the options, and of course we will support as best we can anybody in an emergency.
I see one question here, which is a pretty obvious one I didn't cover off earlier. So why does SOS offer both their own hosting and an Azure hosting option? So just to cover that off, we recognize that in the market, there are some customers that are wedded to using Microsoft, or for whatever reason, they absolutely have to use the Azure platform. So we recognize that there is a percentage of customers that may fall into that category. Hence, that's why we've gone down the path of getting our certification and setting up and being able to use the Sage Partner Cloud on the Azure platform. So some of the key points that I covered off earlier may point to, well, you probably should use SOS logically from a pricing and setup perspective. But we do understand we do have some clients that are just insistent on using the Azure platform, and we really want to be a hosting partner of choice, and making sure that if you come to us for hosting, whether it's through our own infrastructure or Azure's, we can handle it through both.
Exactly. What about so somebody's asking about the handouts for today, like your list of the comparison and that sort of thing. So no problem. We'll send that out when we send the recording of this webinar. Another question was, can you move files to from local computer to the hosted environment? It's a good one.
Yes. So on the Sage, on the SOS a remote desktop connection, absolutely you can, to be able to move it directly from your desktop and up. You can do that on the Sage Partner Cloud. It does require some configuration, and there are some limitations as to file sizes that you can transfer across. But if you're talking like simple Word and Excel documents, yeah, not a problem in both environments to be able to do that. Just as a caveat on providing the slides and information today, as the Sage Partner Cloud starts to mature, and the information as it stands today be correct, in a week or two, some of those areas where third-party products haven't been certified or up and running on the Sage Partner Cloud could easily, within a matter of days or weeks, could change that from being a yes to a no, from a no to a yes.
Well, for sure, we'd always want to review that with the clients and with Sage, because they are the third-party providers, like Phil said, are working through this. It's relatively new to everybody, so they are working to get their modules certified, and several of the core ones that a lot of clients use are on there already. So we, again, we'll work with that. We didn't talk about using your own Excel or Office licenses in the cloud, did we? Did we mention that?
No, I don't think we covered that off specifically.
Right.
If you do have your own Office licensing, and it's you just need to make sure that to be able to use that in the hosted environment, you need to be on Office 365 Enterprise 3 or higher from a subscription perspective. Easiest way to double check, because I know sometimes with the Microsoft products it's hard to find because they've got 50 different flavors of different subscriptions. If you're paying about $25 a month or more per user for your Office 365 subscription, it should be fine to be able to use that same software in both hosted environments. If you're paying less than that, you're probably not on the right version. So as a rule of thumb, look, if you're paying about $25 Canadian or more, the software should be transferable across onto the server.
Yeah, no, that's a good measure to use, and we'll certainly check that. And if you have your own license, we don't need to bill you for it. So one last couple last questions here, Phil. What about custom built apps? Will they work with SOS in the environment?
100% on the SOS environment. If the Windows compatible program, and we've got loads of clients that have custom applications and scripts and stuff running on the server. In the Sage Partner Cloud, look, it is a Windows-based server as well. It's just a slightly different server setup and configuration from the back end. It should work. Having said that, you may just want to allow an extra day or two for testing to make sure that it gets up and running. Yeah,
and we'll work through those. And even to that point, on the SOS side, we have some clients that have both like Sage 300 and Sage 50 and other companies, and they're running them both in the same environment on SOS. So or they've moved off of Sage 50 to Sage 300, for example, and we keep a running copy of Sage 50 in the environment for for historic lookups and things like that. And that's a big benefit. On the SOS side, we can't really do that on the Partner Cloud Azure. I don't think there'd be any way to do that from what I know, Phil.
I don't think so.
No. Let me just, what's this one? What versions of Windows do you support? So I guess they're asking, like, if they're on an older, it's part of the older Sage setup environment. If they're not upgrading yet for various reasons, and they're currently running on like a 2008 or 2012 server, Windows server, can you support that?
2012, yes. with the caveat that we are trying to get the legacy clients still running on 2012, making sure they'll move on to a minimum 2016 and 2016 moving them up. So we basically go by when Microsoft pull their support for that version of that server. So, you know, server 2012, 2016. So once Microsoft are officially ending life, do an end of life and no more technical support on those, at that point, you'll need to move onto a newer Windows server. We take care of that. We'll schedule it with you as and when you require at that time.
Yeah, and that's kind of accelerated a lot of clients to move to the cloud with us in recent years, because Sage 300, the last few releases, only support Windows Server and SQL 2016 or newer. So a lot of people were on older servers that they're obviously not going to spend the money to update the operating system on a 6 or 7 or 8 year old server, and to buy a new one, difficult cost wise, and even today hard to get chips. People are waiting for servers, so we can get them onto SOS hosting quickly, so it's a benefit on that side too. So all right, let me just check here again that we had a good bunch of questions. So yes, so that added one more question. So the hosting includes a Windows Server license?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So whether it's the Azure version or on the SOS, yes, that's part of what you're paying for that monthly hosting. That's why you have to buy your Sage license or own your Sage subscription. But the hosting fees are basically paying for all those back-end licenses and the support and access.
And just getting onto that pricing piece there, Will, too, like we've really tried to simplify this so that if you're not an IT person, you can understand what you're actually getting. You're not having to then think about how much RAM do I need, how many CPUs and processors and everything else thrown at making Sage 300 run. Our approach to it is, look, you just need Sage 300 to run. Make it run as fast as it can so we can get on with our processing and make sure that we can get our job done. So we deliberately took the approach at SOS saying, here's the pricing, we'll optimize the server to a point where you're really happy with the performance, and you shouldn't have to actually be thinking through, oh, how many processors do I need? Like if you're an accountant, you're an IT expert. So we've taken that complexity completely out of it and said, look, here's a simplified pricing model, regardless of whether you've got a huge Sage database or a tiny one. It's just based on the number of people connecting in on a monthly basis. And that's what we've had probably the biggest feedback that clients have said working with us is we don't have to think about it because you take care of all the backups, the server maintenance, the security, all that, and it's just bundled into that simple pricing structure. So we're not giving you a quote with 30 separate lines, individually itemized everything on there, which makes it really hard to actually understand what you're actually getting.
Yeah, and that's always been the benefit. And like we said before, if you own Office 365 E3 or better, that $11 per Excel user, we just strike that out, right?
Yep.
So, and assuming you're not over the storage limit, yeah, there's nothing else to really think about. Just you got 5 Sage users, then you need 5 SQL licenses and 5 concurrent connections per month. So makes it very simple to understand what's it going to cost. Now the Azure stuff, yes, because of the way Azure charges, there's a little more complexity to that, and they charge a little bit more because it's just the way the Azure is priced. But as Phil mentioned, as we go through it and get more understanding, you know, the team at SOS will be able to probably even closer estimate your monthly fees based on what we look at. All right. Well, I really do thank you for taking the time, Phil. It's been timely. People have been, more and more talking about it for all the reasons we chatted about, whether it's, concerned with security and ransomware, whether it's working from home or remote offices, and having slow capability to remote into your work through a VPN to the office and then run Sage from a desktop in there or something crazy. It's just a much easier way of working. And we didn't mention it, but SOS does offer a VPN connectivity option too for additional cost. But most of our clients, the connection through RDP is encrypted, so it's relatively secure, and most people have gone that way. But there are some that I think have a VPN connection with you, and then they connect to that VPN from wherever they're working from, and then they're inside SOS and running the system. Correct? It just occurred to me now. We didn't really chat about that, so.
Yep, correct.
So basically, if anybody has any more questions, feel free to reach out to Mike and I. You can email, say, sales@da.ca. You can give us a call. You can email us individually. We will be following up tomorrow with the recording of this event and some handouts. And, you know, we'll get you the information you need. And if you want to move, we can move pretty quickly. We're doing, you know, several of these a month typically now. Recently it's accelerated, and you know, I think people are much happier once they get onto an environment they don't have to worry about, they don't have to back up, they can access from anywhere, you know, assuming they have internet connectivity. And even if they don't, sometimes you just tether your phone if you just need to do something and connect to it that way. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. So thank you very much for the time, Phil.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, everyone, for attending today's session.
All right, and we have another session on December 15th. I should have popped that up. So the next session will be showing a different AP automation solution. It's going to be noon, December 15th. That's a Wednesday. It'll be with another strategic partner of Sage's and ours called Pacific Tech. And like I said, they have AP automation, purchasing workflow, and a new web interface to do that. Has some different features than maybe some of the ones we've shown in the past. So look for those emails to come out, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll give you a few minutes back. All right. Thanks all.